Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Daniel Aguilar, Founding Director of the Center for Social Justice and Chief Diversity Officer at Excelsior College. Daniel has more than 30 years of leading and managing a diverse portfolio of higher education, social service, and religious organizations and programs. He brings a holistic view of social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion to his role, and he joins us today to talk about how diversity can improve institutions' bottom line, not only from a financial and ROI perspective, but also from its ability to create a culture of innovation. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Hi.
You just came back from a ton of travel. You've been so busy lately.
Yes, it's been really exciting. Networking and sharing thoughts and learning. It's been fantastic.
You've been in DEI now for a long time. How did you get here? Tell us a little bit about your path.
Well, no, it's actually my fifth career, and I've been in it for 21 years, 20 of which, the first 20 were in the space of career and professional development.
Okay.
So I was leading efforts in that area. But since a decade ago, I started to see the value of that work and to focus my work on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay.
The value of social justice. So I knew that at some point I was likely to transition into a full focus on DEI, or JEDI, as we call it often, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Because I really believe that as we prepare our next generation of leaders, doing it focused on diversifying our decision-making tables and making sure that all our new workforce and leadership values diversity, equity, and inclusion as an asset to decision-making and performance is critical for the solutions we need to bring to our challenges. Yeah. So it's been a journey, but I'm loving being in this space, and I think it's very important.
Yeah. So I'm a Star Wars fan, so you tell me, are you a Jedi Master?
No. No, I wish, but no.
At least in that context.
That's right.
So DEI, we've heard so much about it. Why is it important for university presidents?
I think, as we listen, read the news, learn about the world, it is very clear that there is a problematic lack of access, lack of equity in opportunities that hurt us. Not just the people who are left behind, but that hurt all of us. I was reading OECD data recently. They identified that it takes a family 5 generations to get out of poverty. There's an author, Chia Sheldon, that talks about this very eloquently and coined the term the bandwidth tax of uncertainty. And she talks about how people who are coming from behind, who don't have access to resources, who have a limitation of opportunities, have to deal with a bandwidth tax of uncertainty, which is a limitation of cognitive, affective, and physical resources to function. And think of it intuitively. You're playing a sport, you're about to score, right? But you know that the strike is coming. It's very difficult to keep the technique and finish the job because you're bracing. Well, this is how people live, right? If it takes 5 generations of lack of opportunity and threats of homelessness and food insecurity, it's still in the United States, the greatest predictor of someone's economic and professional development is their parents' wealth and education. But we know that education can be a game changer. Education can transform lives. And I think that's why we are in this business, right? Because we believe in it. If you look at DOL data, for example, as soon as someone earns a bachelor's degree in the United States, the day they get their diploma, their unemployment rate drops to half, their wages double. They change bracket categorically. But if you look at Pell research, only 11% of people in poverty in the United States complete a college education.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that we're not only leaving people behind, is we're missing their brilliance. We need that brilliance not just to survive, we need that brilliance at our decision-making tables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when we do strategic planning with an institution, we want stakeholder involvement. And, obviously from a change management perspective, that's important to build a shared vision, reduce resistance to change. But it also, we tell folks, it also has to do with diversity. It's not skin color. It's not a bunch of other things. It's diversity of thought. As a president of a university, you don't necessarily know. In fact, most don't know what's actually going on the front lines. You really know it from a mega trend perspective and what your VPs report to you. So that diversity of thought to us is far more important.
Absolutely. See, higher education, I think, in my perspective, I've been part of 9 higher education institutions as a student or as a professional. And I have consulted for a good number of them, a couple of dozen. And I have yet to come across an institution that hasn't invested quite a bit of energy and resources to diversifying their student body and their workforce. Right? It's something that's very important. We know that it's valuable and we pursue it with energy. But in comparison, I have yet to come across an institution that has invested as many resources and energy in preparing for that diversity, adapting to that diversity, and growing from that diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And it is problematic, right? Because it's not only that we are not embracing that very complex and rich reality of everyone that we have in our ecosystems, but it is also that we're missing an opportunity to become better. Think of it intuitively. We make better decisions and develop better solutions when we consider a diversity of perspectives, experiences, overcome challenges, ideas, skills. So by not focusing on that diversity as an asset to our decision-making and performance, right, we miss a great opportunity to become better as institutions and to be more effective in our work, to reach a higher ROI, right, and to be closer to our return on mission. And there's even an additional problem that I see that is quite challenging in long term, and that is that if we do not leverage that diversity and focus on growing from that diversity, it is very likely that the message that we're conveying to our students is, come to our institutions, we know what you need to learn. We know what experiences you need to have. We know what you need to succeed. And what that does subsequently is that it makes students believe that adaptation is the way to succeed the academic rigor, the co-curricular rigor, and even their integration into the workforce. When what we need is a next generation of leaders that challenges the status quo, right? That figures out a way to help organizations begin to see the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion as an asset to decision-making and performance, and have them be at our decision-making tables organizationally, in our communities, in our states, in our nations, in our globe. So I think we can miss tremendously on our capacity to perform and our capacity to prepare our next generation of leaders.
Well, I thought that there's another point that goes right along with that, is when you convey the message, come to us, we'll teach you what you need, that's also saying that your story is not important. And to me, that is a critical thing. I mean, if you take a look at Black Lives Matter, that whole movement, whether Republican, Democrat, you believe in it, you don't believe in it, by telling a very large population that your experiences don't matter, that this is the history of our country and your history doesn't matter. I mean, that is marginalization if I've ever defined it. And are we going to get authentic voices at the table, or are we just going to get voices at the table who sound like us and we go, oh, we like that person because they sound like us, versus we like that person because they bring a unique perspective, that's something that I haven't thought of.
This is a very important point, Ram. Let me talk about it from the perspective of a concept that, in my mind, synthesizes what we need to be thinking about and what the challenge is. And that is the concept of integration. I've been significantly worried how the higher education system often presents a significant level of fragmentation to the student experience. Mm-hmm. Let's take the example of experiential learning. We know that experiential learning is critical for the student development and for their application of their learning, and the opportunity to go through meaningful, transformative experiences and to process them, to make meaning out of them. It's just key. You look at the authors and literature, and it's just very important. And we tell that to students, but then we set them off in our campuses and they have to work through 10 departments that offer experiential learning, that operate under 3 divisions. And it's even difficult for us to explain what that means. And it feels sometimes that the student experience becomes a scavenger hunt. And guess who hurts? The students who are limited in privilege, right? They have 3 jobs, or they are off campus and they're trying to navigate all this complexity in a way that makes it more difficult for them. So we have a responsibility to integrate the student experience, but you were bringing up this very important concept that we also have a very important responsibility to integrate the student story in their college experience. It is very common, and this is not difficult to identify, that the student story is not something that becomes part of their curriculum, right? How many courses start by asking the student, who are you, and then customizing the curriculum to them? That is costly, right? It takes time, and it happens quite seldom. But students, whether traditional or non-traditional, they bring a wealth of perspective and experiences and culture and understandings that are part of their narrative, right? And if we figure out a way to integrate the narrative of the student to include the personal, the academic, the co-curricular, and the career development aspects of it, then we are truly being holistic and responding to the student growth and development in a comprehensive way. And then there is another aspect of the integration which also worries me significantly. We silo. And it is so important to understand that the preparation of our next generation of leaders cannot be delegated to anyone. That we need to figure out how to engage everyone in the on-campus and off-campus community to scaffold that student success in a way that engages everyone in our work. So those 3 levels of integration, I think, are critical for us to offer robust and effective academic and preparation of our next generation opportunities, but they're very easy to miss.
Yeah. Well, I think you said something earlier on in our conversation, which really resonated with me, is we want to diversify. We have all these metrics about diversifying. We want X percentage, of, this race or that race or whatever, but we don't do a good job about what happens when they get here. How do we customize? How do we integrate that experience so that it's not a scavenger hunt for them? And I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, Drumm, I am an international in this country. I arrived to a grad school from Mexico, and I remember the process of trying to decipher whether I could integrate my story in what I was learning. And it became evident at some point that I couldn't. I needed to detach from my reality to be open and receptive to what was presented to me, just for sustainability purposes. Now, at the end of the day, I figured out how to integrate them back together, right? But I wonder, the risk that we have our students go through to, at some point, potentially let go of the richness of what they bring, right? To learn something new. How will they then perform, or how will they approach their leadership roles once they get there? And how can we help them remain authentic and value that authenticity in them and others in order to help us create a better world, better organizations, better communities? I mean, we're struggling, right? The discourse doesn't look very good right now. And helping our next generation to be open.
It's an election year.
My goodness. Yeah.
So, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things, it reminds me of a good friend of mine. He's been a guest on the program a couple of times, Russell Lowry Hart, who's the president at Amarillo College. It's a junior college there in Amarillo, Texas. And he looked at what their prototypical student looks like. It wasn't one of those, come to us, we'll teach you what you need. It's like, we want to make sure that we have provided for you when you get here. So they did the market research. They realized their avatar, they call her Maria, the prototypical 27-year-old student working 2 jobs, couple of kids, etc. They brought the services to their students, partnering with the community. They had one term that they had 99 students go homeless during the term. Wow. They lost only 1 student because they were able to bring the resources in that those students need. I mean, you have to provide different things. The student's narrative is very different. You have to meet them where they are. You cannot expect them to say, oh, this is what I need, and you'll get me there. No, we will get you there, but we also need to provide the scaffolding, like you say, to give them what they need.
And if you think of it, Drumm, it's not only moral responsibility, it is a strategy for us to be effective in our facilitation of learning, right? The best way in which people learn are by seeing the value of what they're learning and then applying that learning. Mm-hmm. And it is very difficult to help someone go through those 2 phases of their learning if it is fragmented from who they are, if it is not addressing their needs, if it is not allowing them to remain authentic, if it is not taking care of all the challenges and barriers that they will be facing. I had the opportunity in my doctoral program to work with a peer who developed my PhD is in instructional systems technology. So we were working quite a bit on instructional design theories. And she developed a very interesting theory called teaching to the bottleneck. And her argument was, we're so focused on figuring out how to perfect our curriculum. We're so focused on figuring out how to facilitate the most innovative and engaging instructional methods. But we miss that students very often come facing bottlenecks. And that if we don't address those barriers and challenges they're facing, no curriculum, no instructional method will do the trick. They're just not ready for it. What is limiting or impeding their ability to engage or to learn? And so you have to start there. You have to be ready to throw out the curriculum you have prepared and even the instructional methodology to help a student get to where they are. And if you have a student living in their car or without enough food to eat or worried for the housing of their family, you cannot start with concepts, right? Or with innovative instructional methods. You have to start by addressing their needs and helping them integrate that reality into their learning.
Yeah. Who cares about calculus when you're living out of your car, right?
Yes.
A long time ago, I was doing an accreditation visit for a school, and the president there had a unique philosophy. He said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm.
You've got to reach them on that level before they're going to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to listen to you. And that's, to me, what JEDI is all about.
And Drumm, there's I think a deeper message and processing that we need to do for that purpose. I am really attracted to a model by the Intercultural Development Research Institute, developed by Dr. Milton Bennett. It's the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, or DMIS. But what I love the most about that model is that it's based on a very powerful premise that I think we all often miss when designing our educational ecosystems. And that premise is based on an observation that as human beings, we tend to see ourselves and what we do as highly complex, our realities as very complex entities. I mean, you ask me who I am, I'm going to tell you a ball of complexity about my family and our health and career and finances and hobbies. And now the observation continues by identifying that we also perceive simultaneously, we perceive others' realities, particularly those we have a hard time understanding, those that are really different to us, assuming a lesser level of complexity in them.
Mm. And it's not. It's no less a complexity. In fact, it could be even more complex.
Yes. And that we inadvertently simplify other realities.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge here is that then we don't interact with each other in a way that allows us to see one another at a level plane, and that we tend to other someone else, right? Define them by a single story, according to Dr. Adichie. But what's the challenge here is, regardless of our ability to understand other realities, we have the opportunity, I would say the responsibility, to see them as complex as us, to assume the same level of complexity, to engage with them under that assumption of the same level of complexity, therefore approaching them to learn, to grow, right? To work with them for us to lift our communities and our future. And I think that there's a fundamental problem with the infrequent focus on the student's story, because we don't learn about their complexity. We miss it. Mm-hmm. By not inquiring about it, we miss it. By not supporting the reality of the student to help them learn, we're missing that complexity. So then we might end up like facilitating learning in a vacuum, right? In a fictitious space, when we could land it and ground it on the realities that our students are facing at the same time that we learn and enhance our ROI.
Yeah. So we're going to bring this to a real grounded reality. What can universities presidents do? What should university presidents do to improve the culture, improve the JEDI in their institutions? What are some of the hard and fast things that need to be done?
First, seeing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion not just as a moral responsibility, but as a return on investment. Return investment for the institution and return on investment for our future. We have many challenges. Many of them are systemic. Many of them are taking us to crossroads. If we don't prepare a new generation of leaders that sees diversity and inclusion as an asset to decision making, we might not have certain aspects of the future as we know it. And there's a disconnect. I was reading in Strata report recently that 95% of academic administrators, of higher education administrators, believe that we are preparing students ready for the workforce. They asked the same question of students, 39% agreed. They asked the same question to employers, 33% agreed. So there's a gap, and we need a next generation of leaders that is ready to address the systemic challenges that we're facing. And I argue that, as I was mentioning before, that we need to diversify those decision-making tables and to enhance the intercultural development of those decision-making tables so that we're in truth interdisciplinary and in truth dialectic in how we come up with the solutions that we need for the problems that we face.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense. But once you've got the students there, you've got to, like Russell did, you've got to make sure the services are available when they need, as well as understanding what their path is going to be. It's going to be very different than your, quote, traditional student is. And you need to be able to provide those supports and things that they want so that they can be successful.
Yeah, in other words, Drumm, let's stop expecting that we're going to bring diversity in a traditional package. It doesn't
Really?
work that way.
What a concept. Oh, gosh. Daniel, I knew this conversation was going to go by quickly. I didn't expect it was going to be this fast. So
it's been wonderful.
It has been great. So if you would please, 3 takeaways for university presidents and boards.
The way to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice as an asset to our decision-making and performance is by looking at it as an opportunity to enhance our ROI, not just our return on mission. Right? That's to me an important takeaway, that we need to stop seeing JEDI as an aside, as something that is good to do, as something that someone is taking care of, but rather as integrated into the work that we do. That's one. 2, the value of integrating the student story, and for that matter, our staff and faculty story, into our work is critical, because it brings not only authenticity, but it brings brilliance that otherwise we miss in our growth and in our opportunity to truly have an impact. And at the end of the day, to me, it's about making sure that, as a third point, that we remember that our work is preparing a next generation that will make or break our realities, our future. And that integrating in the curriculum and in the co-curriculum and in our approach to how we recruit them, how we help them persist, how we help them graduate, and even how we support their development when they're done, we must integrate social justice, diversity, and equity and inclusion in our conversation and in the preparation that we need in order to thrive and to survive.
Mm-hmm. It makes perfect sense. And, I normally don't do this, but I'm going to. It reminds me of a story and something that I learned years ago. As a pilot, I was, mission commander or whatnot. I was in charge of the entire airplane. And my attitude back then was, if the folks flying with me want to learn, they'll ask me questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, no, that's not. You got to ask them questions. Yes. You got to meet them at that level where they are. And once they feel accepted, they are going to reach up to your level. The trick is quit trying to think that our level is any better than anybody else's. Meet them in the middle, because we all are the same. We just have different packages on the outside, different experiences.
That is so powerful, Drumm. The way in which I say it is, we cannot assume that because a voice is not being heard, that it doesn't exist or it doesn't need to be brought to the surface. And the way to do that is not just, they have something to say, they'll bring it up. is to actually dig in, complicate things, right? And get comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations, because we need to do better.
Absolutely right. I couldn't have said it better, Daniel. So tell me, what's next for you?
Well, I am new in my role. I have been at Excelsior University now 8 months, and we have developed a fantastic agenda. We started with a listening tour, 41 focus groups, 400 students, alums, faculty, and staff. We identified all the systemic levels at which we want to do our work, and we have identified a fantastic goal of becoming a multicultural organization under the Jackson model, and 7 key strategies, all of which are currently under development in a very exciting way. I can't wait to see them in action. That's definitely next for me, and hoping for a fantastic impact of each of them.
Well, I wish you all the best. We'll have to check back in a year or so and see how it's going.
Looking forward to it, Drumm. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm truly honored.
Thank you. It's been great to have you on the show. I look forward to the next time. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to today's guest, Daniel Aguilar, and for his sharing his perspectives on how JEDI can aid institutions' bottom lines. Our next guest is Jeff Spear of CFO Colleagues. Jeff is one of the top finance guys in higher ed, and he'll be joining us to talk about what institutions can do to improve around their finances and sustainability.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.